I was already down here.
At the end of the 30th day of festivities, with 60 days more of partying to enjoy, Buttercup was genuinely concerned that she might lack the strength to endure. Smile, smile, hold hands, bow and thank, over and over. She was simply exhausted from 1 month. How was she to survive twice that? It turned out, because of the king's health, to be both easy and sad. For with 55 days to go, Lotharin began to weaken terribly. Prince Humperdinck ordered new doctors brought in. There was still the last miracle man alive, Max, but since they had fired him long before, bringing him back on the case now was simply not deemed wise. If he was incompetent when Lotharin was only desperately ill, how could he suddenly be a cure-all now with Lotharin dying? The new doctors all agreed on various tried-and-true medications, and within 48 hours of their coming on the case, the king was dead. The wedding date, of course, was unchanged. It wasn't every day a country had a 500th anniversary, but all the festivities were either curtailed entirely or vastly cut down. And Prince Humperdinck became, 45 days before the wedding, King of Florin, and that changed everything, because before he had taken nothing but his hunting seriously, and now he had to learn everything, learn to run a country. And he buried himself in books and wise men, and how did you tax this, and when should you tax that, and foreign entanglements, and who could be trusted, and how far, and with what. And before her lovely eyes, Humperdinck changed from a man of fear and action to one of frenzied wisdom, because he had to get it all straight now, before any other country dared interfere with the future of Florin. So the wedding, when it actually took place, was a tiny thing in brief, sandwiched in between a minister's meeting and a treasury crisis. And Buttercup spent her first afternoon as queen, wandering around the castle, not knowing what in the world to do with herself. It wasn't until King Humperdinck walked out on the balcony with her to greet the gigantic throng that had spent the day in patient waiting that she realized it had happened. She was the queen. Her life, for whatever it was worth, belonged now to the people. They stood together on the castle balcony, accepting the cheers, the cries, the endless thunderous hip-hips, until Buttercup said, "Please, may I walk once more among them?" And that king said with a nod that she might, and down she went again, as on the day of the wedding announcement, radiant and alone. And again the people swept apart to let her pass, weeping and cheering and bowing, and then one person booed. On the balcony, watching it all, Humperdinck reacted instantly, gesturing soldiers into the area where the sound had come from, dispatching more troops quickly down to surround the queen, and like clockwork, Buttercup was safe, the booer apprehended and led away. "Hold a moment," Buttercup said, still shaken by the unexpectedness of what had happened. The soldier who held the booer stopped. "Bring her to me," Buttercup said, and in a moment the booer was right there, eye to eye. It was an ancient woman, withered and bent, and Buttercup thought of all the faces that had gone by in her lifetime, but this one she could not remember. "Have we met?" the queen asked. The old one shook her head. "Then why? Why on this day? Why do you insult the queen?" "Because you're not worthy of cheers," the old woman said, and suddenly she was yelling. "You had love in your hands, and you gave it up for gold!" She turned to the crowd. "It is true what I tell you. There was love alongside her in the fire swamp, and she dropped it from her fingers like garbage. And that is what she is, the queen of garbage." "I had given my word to the prince," Buttercup began, but the old woman would not be quieted. "Ask her how she got through the fire swamp. Ask her if she did it alone. She threw love away to be the queen of grime, the queen of muck. I'm old and life means nothing to me, so I'm the only person in all this crowd to dare to tell truth, and truth says bow to the queen of fetulence if you want to, but not I. Cheer the queen of slime and ordure if you want to, but not I. Rave over the beauty of the queen of cesspools, but not I! Not I!" She was advancing on Buttercup now. "Take her away," Buttercup ordered. But the soldiers could not stop her, and the old woman kept coming on, her voice getting louder and louder and louder and louder and louder and louder and... Buttercup woke up screaming. She was in her bed, alone, safe. The wedding was still 60 days away, but her nightmares had begun. The next night, she dreamed of giving birth to their first child, and italics, interruption, and hey, how about giving old Morgenstern credit for a major league fake out there? I mean, didn't you think for a while at least that they were really married? I did. It's one of my biggest memories of my father reading. I had pneumonia, remember, but I was a little better now and madly caught up in the book. And one thing you know when you're 10 is that no matter what, there's going to be a happy ending. They can sweat all they want to scare you, the authors, but back of it all, you just have no doubt that in the long run, justice is going to win out. And Wesley and Buttercup, well, they had their troubles, sure, but they were going to get married and live happily ever after. I would have bet the family fortune if I'd found a sucker big enough to take me on. Well, when my father got through with that sentence where the wedding was sandwiched between the ministers' meeting and the treasury whatever, I said, "You read that wrong." My father's this little bald barber, remember that too, and kind of illiterate. Well, you just don't challenge a guy who has trouble reading and say he's read something incorrectly because that's really threatening. "I'm doing the reading," he said. "I know, but you got it wrong. She didn't marry that rotten Humperdinck. She marries Wesley." "It says right here," my father began, a little huffy, and he starts going over it again. "You must have skipped a page then, something. Get it right, huh?" By now, he was more than a tiny bit upset. "I skipped nothing. I read the words. The words are there. I read them. Good night." And off he went. "Hey, please, no!" I called after him, but he's stubborn. And next thing, my mother was in saying, "Your father says his throat is too sore." I told him... Oh, thank you.
But it's very loose.
I told him not to read so much, and she tucked and fluffed me, and no matter how I batted, it was over. No more story till the next day. I spent that whole night thinking Buttercup married Humperdinck. It just rocked me. How could I explain it? But the world didn't work that way. Good got attracted to good, evil you flushed down the john, and that was that. But their marriage, I couldn't make it jibe. God, did I work at it. First, I thought that probably Buttercup had this fantastic effect on Humperdinck and turned him into a kind of Wesley. Or maybe Wesley and Humperdinck turned out to be long-lost brothers, and Humperdinck was so happy to get his brother back. He said, "Look, Wesley, I didn't realize who you were when I married her, so what I'll do is I'll divorce her and you marry her, and that way we'll all be happy." To this day, I don't think I was ever more creative. But it didn't take. Something was wrong, and I couldn't lose it. Suddenly, there was this discontent gnawing away until it had a place big enough to settle in, and then it curled up and stayed there, and it's still inside me lurking as I write this now. The next night, when my father went back to reading, and the marriage turned out to have been Buttercup's dream, I screamed, "I knew all along! I knew it!" And my father said, "So you're happy now. It's all right now. We can please continue?" And I said, "Go." And he did. But I wasn't happy. Oh, my ears were happy, I guess, and my story sense was happy. My heart, too, but in my... I suppose you have to call it soul. There was that damn discontent shaking its dark head. All this was never explained to me till I was in my teens, and there was this great woman who lived in my hometown, Edith Neisser, dead now, and she wrote terrific books about how we screw up our children. Brothers and Sisters was one of her books. The Eldest Child was another, published by Harper. Edith doesn't need the plug, seeing, like I said, as she's no longer with us, but if there are any amongst you who are worried that maybe you're not being perfect parents, pick up one of Edith's books while there's still time. I knew her because her kid Ed got his haircuts from my pop, and she was this writer, and by my teens I knew secretly that was the life for me too, except I couldn't tell anybody, it was too embarrassing. Barber's son, if they hustled, maybe got to be IBM salesmen, but writers? No way. Don't ask me how, but eventually Edith discovered my ambition, and from then on, sometimes we would talk. And I remember once we were having iced tea on the Neisser porch and talking, and just outside the porch was their badminton court, and I was watching some kids play badminton, and Ed had just shellacked me. And as I left the court for the porch, he said, "Don't worry, it'll all work out. You'll get me next time." And I nodded, and then Ed said, "And if you don't, you'll beat me at something else." I went to the porch and sipped iced tea, and Edith was reading this book, and she didn't put it down when she said, "That's not necessarily true, you know." I said, "How do you mean?" And that's when she put her book down and looked at me and said it. Life isn't fair, Bill. We tell our children that it is, but it's a terrible thing to do. It's not only a lie, it's a cruel lie. Life is not fair, and it never has been, and it's never going to be. Would you believe that for me, right then, it was like one of those comic books where the light bulb goes on over Mandrake the magician's head? "It isn't!" I said, so loud I really startled her. "You're right! It's not fair!" I was so happy if I'd known how to dance, I'd have started dancing. Isn't that great? Isn't it just terrific? I think along about here, Edith must have thought I was well on my way toward being bonkers, but it meant so much to me to have it said and out and free and flying. That was the discontent I endured the night my father stopped reading. I realized right then that was the reconciliation I was trying to make and couldn't. And that's what I think this book's about. All those Columbia experts can spiel all they want about the delicious satire. They're crazy. This book says life isn't fair. And I'm telling you, one and all, you better believe it. I got a fat, spoiled son. He's not going to nab Miss Reingold. And he's always going to be fat. Even if he gets skinny, he'll still be fat and he'll still be spoiled, and life will never be enough to make him happy. And that's my fault, maybe. Make it all my fault if you want. The point is, we're not created equal. For the rich, they sing, life isn't fair. I got a cold wife. She's brilliant. She's stimulating. She's terrific. There's no love. That's okay, too. Just so long as we don't keep expecting everything to somehow even out for us before we die. Look, grown-ups, skip this paragraph. I'm not about to tell you this book has a tragic ending. I already said in the very first line how it was my favorite in all the world. But there's a lot of bad stuff coming up. Torture you've already been prepared for, but there's worse. There's death coming up, and you better understand this. Some of the wrong people die. Be ready for it.
Does that include Wesley?
This isn't Curious George uses the potty. Nobody warned me, and it was my own fault. You'll see what I mean in a little. And that was my mistake, so I'm not letting it happen to you. The wrong people die, some of them. And the reason is this. Life is not fair. Forget all the garbage your parents put out. Remember Morgenstern. You'll be a lot happier. Okay, enough. Back to the next. Nightmare time. The next night, she dreamed of giving birth to their first child, and it was a girl. A beautiful little girl, and Buttercup said, I'm sorry it wasn't a boy. I know you need an heir. And Humperdinck said, Beloved, sweet, don't concern yourself with that. Just look at the glorious child God has given us. And then he left, and Buttercup held the child to her perfect breast, and the child said, Your milk is sour. And Buttercup said, Oh, I'm sorry. And she shifted to the other breast, and the child said, No, this is sour too. And Buttercup said, I don't know what to do. And the baby said, You always know what to do. You always know exactly what to do. You always do exactly what's right for you, and the rest of the world can go hang. And Buttercup said, You mean Wesley? And the baby said, Of course I mean Wesley. And Buttercup explained patiently, I thought he was dead, you see. I'd given my word to your father. And the baby said, I'm dying now. There's no love in your milk. Your milk has killed me. And then the child stiffened and cracked and turned in Buttercup's hands to nothing but dry dust. And Buttercup screamed and screamed. Even when she was awake again with 59 days to go till her marriage, she was still screaming. The third nightmare came quickly the following evening, and again it was a baby. This time a son, marvelous, strong boy. And Humperdinck said, Beloved, it's a boy. And Buttercup said, I didn't fail you, thank heavens. And then he was gone, and Buttercup called out, May I see my son now? And all the doctors scurried around outside her royal room, but the boy was not brought in. What seems to be the trouble? Buttercup called out, and the chief doctor said, I don't quite understand, but he doesn't want to see you. And Buttercup said, Tell him I'm his mother, and I'm the queen, and I command his presence. And then he was there, just as handsome a baby boy as anyone could wish for. Close it, Buttercup said, and the doctors closed the door. The baby stood in the corner as far from her bed as he could. Come here, darling, Buttercup said. Why? Are you going to kill me too? I'm your mother, and I love you. Now come here, I've never killed anybody. You killed Wesley. Did you see his face in the fire swamp? When you walked away and left him? That's what I call killing. When you're older, you'll understand things. Now I'm not going to tell you again. Come here. Murderer, the baby shouted, Murderer! But by then she was out of bed and she had him in her arms and was saying, Stop that! Stop it this instant! I love you! And he said, Your love is poison. It kills. And he died in her arms and she started to cry. Even when she was awake again with 58 days to go till her marriage, she was still crying.
Why do we have to hear all of the different nightmares?
The next night, she simply refused to go to sleep. Instead, she walked and read and did needlework and drank cup after cup of steaming tea from the Indies. She felt sick with weariness, of course, but such was her fear of what she might dream that she preferred any waking discomfort to whatever sleep might have to offer. And at dawn, her mother was pregnant. No, more than pregnant. Her mother was having a baby. And as Buttercup stood there in the corner of the room, she watched herself being born. And her father gasped at her beauty, and so did her mother. And the midwife was the first to show concern. The midwife was a sweet woman, known throughout the village for her love of babies, and she said, "Look, trouble." And the father said, "What trouble? Where before did you ever see such beauty?" And the midwife said, "Don't you understand why she was given such beauty? It's because she has no heart here. Listen, the baby is alive, but there's no beat." And she held Buttercup's chest against the father's ear, and the father could only nod and say, "We must find a miracle man to place a heart inside." But the midwife said, "That would be wrong, I think. I've heard before of creatures like this, the heartless ones, and as they grow bigger, they get more and more beautiful, and behind them is nothing but broken bodies and shattered souls. And these without hearts are anguish bringers, and my advice would be, since you're both still young, to have another child, a different child, and be rid of this one now. But, of course, the final decision is up to you." And the father said to the mother, "Well?" And the mother said, "Since the midwife is the kindest person in the village, she must know a monster when she sees one. Let's get to it." So Buttercup's father and Buttercup's mother put their hands to the baby's throat, and the baby began to gasp. Even when Buttercup was awake again at dawn, with 57 days to go till her marriage, she could not stop gasping. From then on, the nightmares became simply too frightening. When there were 50 days to go, Buttercup knocked one night on the door to Prince Humperdinck's chambers. She entered when he bid her to. "I see trouble," he said. "You look very ill." And so she did. Beautiful, of course, still that, but in no way well. Buttercup did not see quite how to begin. He ushered her into a chair. He got her water. She sipped at it, staring dead ahead. He put the glass to one side. "At your convenience, Princess," he said. "It comes to this," Buttercup began. "In the fire swamp, I made the worst mistake in all the world. I love Wesley. I always have. It seems I always will. I did not know this when you came to me. Please believe what I am about to say. When you said that I must marry you or face death, I answered, 'Kill me.' I meant that. I mean this now, too. If you say I must marry you in 50 days, I will be dead by morning." The prince was literally stunned. After a long moment, he knelt by Buttercup's chair, and in his gentlest voice started to speak. "I admit that when we first became engaged, there was to be no love involved. That was as much my choice as yours, though the notion may have come from you. But surely you must have noticed, in this last month of parties and festivities, a certain warming of my attitude." "I have. You've been both sweet and noble." "Thank you. Having said that, I hope you appreciate how difficult this next sentence is for me to say. I would die myself rather than cause you unhappiness by standing in the way of your marriage, marrying the man you love." Buttercup wanted almost to weep with gratitude. She said, "I will bless you all my days for your kindness." Then she stood. "So it's settled. Our wedding is off." He stood too, except for perhaps one thing. That being, have you considered the possibility that he might not want any longer to marry you? Until that moment she had not. You were, I hate to remind you, not altogether gentle with his emotions in the fire swamp. Forgive me for saying that, beloved, but you did leave him in the lurch, in a manner of speaking. Buttercup sat down hard, her turn now to be stunned. Humperdinck knelt again beside her. "This Wesley of yours, the sailor boy, he has pride?" Buttercup managed to whisper, "More than any man alive, I sometimes think." "Well, consider then, dearest. Here he is, off sailing somewhere with the dread pirate Roberts. He's had a month to survive the emotional scars you dealt him. What if he wants now to remain single? Or worse, what if he's found another?" Buttercup was now even beyond whispering. "I think, sweetest child, that we should strike a bargain, you and I. If Wesley wants to marry you still, bless you both. If for reasons unpleasant to mention his pride will not let him, then you will marry me, as planned, and be the Queen of Florence." "He couldn't be married, I'm sure." "Not my Wesley." She looked at the prince. "But how can I find out?" What about this? You write him a letter telling him everything. We'll make 4 copies. I'll take my 4 fastest ships and order them off in all directions. The dread pirate Roberts is not often more than a month's sail from Florin. Whichever of my ships finds him will run the white flag of truce, deliver your letter, and Wesley can decide. If no, he can speak that message to my captain. If yes, my captain will sail him here to you, and I will have to content myself somehow with a lesser bride. I'm not sure, but I definitely think that this is the most generous decision I have yet heard. Do me this favor, then, in return. Until we know Wesley's intentions, one way or another, let us continue as we have, so the festivities will not be halted. And if I seem too fond of you, remember that I cannot help myself. Agreed, Buttercup said, going to the door, but not before she kissed his cheek. He followed her. Off with you now and write your letter. And he returned the kiss, smiling with his eyes at her until the corridor curved her from his sight. There was no doubt whatsoever in his mind that he was going to seem too fond of her in the days ahead, because when she died of murder on their wedding night, it was crucial that all Florin realized the depth of his love, the epochal size of his loss, since then no one would dare hesitate to follow him into the revenge war he was to launch against Gilder. At first, when he hired the Sicilian, he was convinced it was best that someone else do her in, all the while—
Wait, who is this?
The prince. All the while making it appear the work of soldiers from Gilder. And when the man in black had somehow materialized to spoil his plans, the prince came close to going insane with rage. But now his basically optimistic nature had reasserted itself. Everything always worked out for the best. The people were infatuated with Buttercup now, as they had never been before her kidnapping. And when he announced from his castle balcony that she had been murdered, he already saw the scene in his mind. He would arrive just too late to save her from strangling, but soon enough to see the Gildarian soldiers leaping from the window of his bedroom to the soft ground below. When he made that speech to the masses on the 500th anniversary of his country, well, there wouldn't be a dry eye in the square. And although he was just the least bit perturbed, since he had never actually killed a woman before with his bare hands, there was a first time for everything. Besides, if you wanted something done right, you did it yourself.